For the longest time, software has kind of lived by this unwritten rule. If it breaks, well, that's on you. But that whole idea, it's completely falling apart. We're talking about a massive shift, a total rethink of how code gets made, who's responsible when it goes wrong, and what the consequences are. So let's get right into it.
I mean, it seems like a simple question, right? But the answer has been, well, let's just say not very satisfying. Just think about it for a second. Your banking app messes up, and a payment just vanishes. Your smart thermostat gets hacked. Or how about this? An AI hiring tool rejects your resume, and nobody can even tell you why. Who's responsible? Who pays? For way too long, the answer has basically been a giant shrug. Not anymore.
Okay, so the first big change is all about what's happening inside the development process. All that stuff that used to be like the last-minute checklist item, things like good governance and accountability. Yeah, that's not an afterthought anymore. Now it's being built right into the DNA of the software, from the very first line of code.
I know. Governance sounds like the most boring corporate buzzword ever. But trust me, in this new world, it is everything. GitHub's well-architected framework puts it really well. It's the whole framework that makes sure the tech we build actually does what we want it to do, and does it safely and responsibly. You can think of it like the official rulebook for building code you can actually trust.
So these are basically the pillars for building that trust. First up, auditability. That just means you need a clear paper trail, who did what and when. Then, accountability. Pretty simple, right? It has to be crystal clear who's calling the shots. Adaptability is huge because these regulations, they're changing all the time. You also need really strong controls for security and access. And maybe most important of all, simplicity. If the rules are too complicated, nobody's going to follow them.
Okay, but that's the ideal world. The reality, especially with AI just exploding everywhere, has created this huge problem. We call it the accountability gap. And it's this giant chasm that opens up when an AI makes a really important decision. I'm talking denying someone a loan. And there's no single person you can point to who's responsible. Worse, nobody can even explain why it happened.
And this quote right here, it absolutely nails the problem. We are building these unbelievably powerful AI systems that are for all intents and purposes black boxes. You feed data in one end, a decision pops out the other. But what happens in the middle, it's often so complicated that even the people who built it can't fully explain it. And that lack of transparency, it's a massive roadblock for accountability.
So this is the real dilemma, isn't it? On one side, you've got AI becoming more and more autonomous, making its own decisions. But on the other side, our entire legal system, our whole idea of ethics, it's all built around human accountability. So when one of these autonomous systems causes actual harm in the real world, who do you blame? The developer? The company? The AI itself? It becomes an almost impossible question.
And you know who gets hit hardest by this? It's the small and medium-sized businesses. They just don't have the deep pockets for a super robust AI setup. They often lack the in-house experts. And a lot of times, their AI adoption is, well, it's kind of fragmented. A little pilot project here, another one there, instead of one big, thought-out strategy. And in a world with more and more rules, that leaves them really, really exposed.
All right, so Europe looked at this growing accountability gap, saw the black box problem, and basically said, nope, we're not having it. They decided to act, and they did not mess around. What they came up with is the EU AI Act, literally the world's first major, comprehensive rulebook for artificial intelligence. So how are they actually doing this? Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's actually pretty smart. They're using a risk-based system, broken down into 4 tiers. Right at the top, you've got unacceptable risk. Think things like social scoring by governments. That's just flat-out banned. Then there's high risk, stuff like AI and medical devices or self-driving cars. That's going to face some serious compliance rules. Below that, limited risk, which is all about transparency. You just have to be told you're talking to a chatbot. And finally, minimal risk. Things like video games or spam filters, they're mostly left alone. See? It's a sliding scale. And to make sure everyone's paying attention, oh yeah, they put some serious teeth into this law. If you don't comply, the fines are, well, they're huge. We're talking a maximum penalty of 35 million euros. But, wait for it, it gets bigger. It's 35 million euros or, and this is the kicker, 7% of a company's global annual revenue, whichever number is bigger. For a company like Google or Amazon, we're not talking millions anymore. We're talking billions. The stakes just got unbelievably high.
So what this all means is that Europe's big move is creating this massive split right down the middle of the tech world. It's a showdown, really. You've got this huge divide, both in philosophy and in law, between how the EU and the US are thinking about who's responsible for software.
And this chart just lays it all out, clear as day. Over in the US, the default is still, hey, we can put it in the contract that we're not liable. The burden of proof is on you, the person who got hurt, to prove the company was negligent. But in the EU, it's flipped completely on its head. Liability is now the default. The burden is on the company to prove they weren't at fault. It is a 180-degree turn from how things have worked for, forever.
Now, of course, the US software industry is not exactly thrilled about this. They're pushing back, and they're pushing back hard. Their main argument, summed up pretty well here by Henry Young from the BSA, is that if companies have to spend all their time worrying about getting sued, they'll spend less time on, well, what they call higher value activities, innovating and building cool new stuff.
I think the best way to understand the difference here comes from these two brilliant metaphors from an analyst named Tom Ehren. He says the U.S. approach is like kicking the can down the road, dealing with it later, moving slow. The EU's approach, he calls that rolling a hand grenade down it to see what happens. I mean, wow, it's just a completely different level of urgency and, disruption.
So where does that leave us? What does all of this actually mean for the software being built today and for the tech we're all going to be using tomorrow? Well, a whole new reality is taking shape, and it's going to affect everybody, from a single developer working in their garage to the biggest tech companies on the planet.
But there's a giant flashing question mark hanging over all of this. And that question is, what about open source? I mean, think about it. So much of the internet, so much of the software we use every single day is built on code that's shared freely by this amazing global community of volunteers.
The whole open source world runs on licenses like the GNU GPL. And just look at the language. It's right there in all caps. There is no warranty. And my favorite part, the entire risk is with you. That is the absolute bedrock of open source. And it is in direct conflict with a system that says liability is the default. How on earth do you hold some volunteer developer on the other side of the world responsible for a bug in code they gave away for free? It's a huge, huge problem.
Okay, let's wrap this up and boil it all down. What do you really need to remember? First, the party's over. The era of consequence-free software is ending, and the EU is leading the way. Second, things like governance and accountability, they're not just nice-to-haves anymore. They are non-negotiable parts of the design process. Third, the tech world is splitting in two. You're going to have one set of rules in Europe and another in the US. And last but not least, the whole future of open source, that's the big, giant question mark nobody has an answer to yet.
And all of this leaves us with one final, massive, multi-trillion-dollar question. As we start enforcing all these rules and demanding more and more accountability, are we building a safer, better, more responsible digital world? Or is accountability actually the enemy of innovation? Are we going to slow down the very progress we're trying to protect? The answer to that question, well, it's going to define the next decade of technology.